What? Hi, it's me. It's true. Finally made it. Sorry, we had a little break and we regrouped. We've invited new friends and we are back. True story, October 6, 2024. Our theme is It's a Big Country. Yeah. I don't know. Just saying. We have two people who've never done this before, who've never done True Story. So thank you so much for being brave, Makeda and Edwin. And welcome you to the True Story family and our community that keeps growing and growing. We've been producing True Story since 2015. That is 9 years in math. 9. And despite the ups and downs, I'm very, very, very proud. Amazing work has come out, and a great community is built every time we get together to really tell our truth together and in a supportive, bubble until we bring it to you, the audience. And then our personal true stories are shared, and they're no longer ours. They're also yours. So for those of you who've come out tonight, thank you. Thank you for being here to hear us. And for those of you watching at home, thank you. And please donate, because the only way to keep this going is money. So if you can, please do, beneath the screen is the button for tonight's program. You can download that and get the bio of all of the writers tonight. And also you can donate to support our program and keep us going into 2025. But actually next month will be our annual Veterans Day celebration. So we'll have one in November and we will do that in December. But right now, it's a big country. There's also one other thing. Kevin Comartin's here tonight. You're not going up yet. But he hasn't been here in years. And it's just the first time you're telling a story since you were here last.
Probably.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for your best to me. I love it. Thank you. All right, so without any further ado, it's Rafeal Clements. All right.
My first realization that the United States was a big country when I first saw Pikes Peak. Upon my father's return from Vietnam, his next posting was Fort Carson, Colorado. I was 7 years old when my family packed up and drove from Bassett, Virginia to Colorado Springs, Colorado, where we would live for the next 2 years. Our house was at the corner of our block, situated so that it was facing directly in front of Pikes Peak with an unimpeded view. I could see that giant snow-capped mass of a rock from the front window of the living room, so perfectly framed in the middle of that window that the sight looked like a majestic portrait landscape. It was the largest mountain I'd ever seen. We would see a lot of Colorado during our time there, making road trips throughout the state in our Rambler station wagon. My father loved road trips. He believed it was the best way to see the place you lived, and it only cost a gallon, well, it only cost a tank of gasoline. We took multiple trips to the Garden of the Gods public park, spending hours gazing at the unique rock formations made of deep red sandstone and limestone, or fishing at Crystal Creek Reservoir located at the base of Pikes Peak, where, just like the name describes, the water was so clear you could see at the bottom of the lake. Sometimes Dad drove us to the Broadmoor, a luxury hotel situated in a forest. In grandeur, that hotel competed with the finest European resort hotels. Exploring the grounds and the woods of the Broadmoor made me feel as if we were in the middle of a fairy tale told by the Brothers Grimm. I grew to love Colorado Springs. Not only its huge mountains, beautiful lakes, stunning forests, and expansive woods, meadows, and valleys, but its people as well. My family was welcomed in the community, even though we were the only Black family in the neighborhood. This was Bassett, Virginia in the 1960s was still in the middle of segregation, despite passage of civil rights legislation. My family back then lived in an all-Black neighborhood. My first year of school, I attended a segregated elementary school. And African Americans, for the most part, interacted only with other African Americans in places other than work. In 1969 Colorado, it was the first time I interacted with white people. I went to school with white children for the first time. And my family ate at restaurants where people of all shades of skin ate together. My dad worked with white soldiers. My mom purchased groceries at stores run by and populated with white people. We were welcomed everywhere we met. So at 7 years old, I had already seen two sides of these United States: the separate and unequal holdover of a troubled past, and the inclusive, accepting version of a promising future. So, there is a sizable group of Americans who believe people illegally crossing the borders to live in the US are the greatest threat to America that ever existed. They spread lies about Haitian immigrants stealing and eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio. Compare that to the residents of Springfield, who report that these Haitian immigrants are hardworking, lovely people who have contributed greatly to the local economy. I imagine those Haitians in Springfield felt the same way my family felt when we moved to Colorado, moving thousands of miles from the only home we ever knew to an unknown place where we had no family or friends, and we didn't know what to expect. But we were accepted, and we were happy. The United States is big enough to accommodate all who want to live in it. At 3.8 million square miles and 345 million people, the US is the third largest country in the world in both size and population. We should not turn our back on immigrants, regardless of their status. I mean, the US was literally created by immigrants, appropriating the land from its original inhabitants. It is a country created by people who were persecuted in their own homelands, who want to make a better life for themselves and their families. And that's what millions of people have done in the past 248 years, contributing to a growing economy and helping to make this place one of the most diverse countries on the planet. Immigrants made the United States what it is. As noted in a certain Broadway musical, they get the job done. So, I love this country, despite its problems, its history, and its unfinished business. I mean, it belongs as much to me as it does to those whose worldview differs from mine. I love this country because of what my ancestors survived, brought here against their will. They lived the lives they forged for themselves, despite hundreds of years of slavery and legalized segregation and discrimination. Their will to endure and live resulted in my existence. I love this country not only because of the opportunities that it's given me, but because of the promise that was set down in that Declaration of Independence 248 years ago. An idea that the world was not used to at the time. The idea that a country could be run by its people. That the people choose their leaders. A democracy. The United States was created for the outsiders, the misfits, the persecuted, and the dreamers looking for a chance to make a new life for themselves. So I can't see myself living anyplace else. I mean, it's the birthplace of the blues, jazz, rock and roll, and country and western. I mean, it's the birthplace that birthed Toni Morrison, August Wilson, and James Baldwin. The telephone, the telegraph, the airplane, basketball, and the polio vaccine were all created here. The music, inventions, innovations, and people birthed in this country have influenced culture all over the world. This is my home. And I'll do whatever I can to fight for the promise of what it's supposed to be for everyone. So, living in Colorado is where I first began to love this country. It's been a messy and problematic love affair. You have the beauty and acceptance of places like Colorado Springs, compared with the racist legacy shared by the southern United States and many other parts of the country. I've been to 35 states, and I'd like to visit for the remaining 15, preferably driving, eating at the neighborhood restaurants recommended by the locals, seeing the famous landmarks, getting a good look at the land. One of my stops will be a return visit to Colorado Springs and an afternoon at the Garden of the Gods. We're fishing at the Crystal Creek Reservoir at the base of Pikes Peak, where, as a very little boy, I first realized that this was indeed a big country.
That was lovely. Rafeal, thank you.
Edwin. So Edwin was to us, you have you did something in 2017, right?
I think it was 2018. Yes, we put up as part of LA Fest. We put up the QU Foundation workshop plays, and that's where my play Power of Anger was up here. Yeah.
And you're working on your film, which is
Yes.
what?
Yeah, it is. Working on the feature version, and I'm finishing up actually the film version of Flower of Anger.
Oh,
Here,
excellent.
so
Oh, it's beautiful.
So that'll be coming probably next year.
Excellent. We're gonna have to put that in the newsletter.
Yeah, I'll make sure that I'll keep you posted for sure.
Please, yeah.
Yeah.
It's this first time telling the story.
Yes, here.
So,
Yeah, I used to do a lot of slam poetry in high school. I'm not worried about slam poet voice.
it's one.
But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much, Rafeal, for sharing. It was very powerful. And thank you, Lizzie, for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah. So this is called Volver. It's like really fresh. So you're the first to hear it. And I just want to also say and like just give a shout out to Carlos Gardel, who his lyrics for this tango from 1934 in this, which is also called Volver. So I just want to shout him out, even though I know he's probably not alive. Or I don't know, maybe he's alive. But I just want to invoke him, bring his energy in, and say, hey, it's a big country. Not really. But it's the largest country in Central America, covering 50,340 square miles. That's 130,170 square kilometers for everyone else without American. Just slightly larger than New York State. Nicaragua shares its borders with Honduras, Costa Rica, and is sandwiched between the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean. It just so happens to be my family's motherland. Origin story of something absolutely poetic, as well as equal parts tragic and comedic. Nicaragua is known as the Tierra de Poetas, the land of poets. And one of those poets was my late mother, Gloria. The youngest of four sisters, La Negra de la Familia, with a life that at times was lived at telenovela proportions. My mother came to the States in 1973, pregnant with my brother Alan, and settled in the San Fernando Valley. She'd only let herself cry in the shower those days. So no one, including her sister, knew she was sad and living with the ghosts of her past life, as well as the consolation of love left behind. My father and my brother Joe amongst them. For immigrants, it's never the size of your motherland that stays with you, but the distance you are away from it. Immigrants have always been the greatest magicians, sawing themselves in half in ways Americans can never imagine. We miss birthdays, weddings, and funerals. The funerals are the ones that hurt the most. The funerals you couldn't attend, keep your deceased loved one in the sort of purgatorio, a kind of Mandela effect, where you imagine they're still alive, going about their days in their homes, painted the color of the trumpets. My mom tried to return to Nicaragua during the revolution in the 70s, but was turned away by the Sandinistas at the airport. It wasn't for another 25 years that she would return. In 2006, my mother and I watched Pedro Almodovar's with Penelope Cruz. Penelope Cruz's character sings this song by the name Volver, which means to return. And I turned to my mother in the darkness of the theater to see her tears lit up by the projection. And I just had her tell me, your grandmother used to sing this song all the time. And I squeezed her hand and I smiled, not knowing I would know the pain of losing my mother's. We made a pact that we'd go to Nicaragua together that night, and in 2008, we made good on that promise. As a filmmaker, I decided I would document the experience, like live the art, right? So I asked her how she felt as we waited for her return home. And she looked into the camera and said, I feel like I'm dreaming. I'm preparing myself for everything that's different in Nicaragua now. 6.5 hours later, we landed, and now the country I heard so many stories about that I longed for was under our feet. Your blood knows when it returns, rushes quickly through your body like the waters of El Rio Coco, whispers your name through the rustle of leaves and the songs of birds. We walked out of the Augusto C. Sandino International Airport and we were met by the kindness of my cousin Juan. The tearful reunion with someone who my mom left as a little boy, who was now this full-ass man. We drove through Managua, a kaleidoscope of colors, art, street vendors, bustling city, the jungle nation I had always dreamed of. Something special about Nicaragua is there are no street numbers or street names, which is wild. Instead, Nicaraguans use reference points from where they start describing a certain address. So usually it's the use of well-known landmarks, buildings, companies, churches, and any other reference points. Give a general idea of where something will be located. Then we mention how many blocks away from the particular address or reference point you go. So for example, because I know that's kind of wild to get your head around, it's literally like from the Calvario Church, 1 block south, half a block east. And you pray to God that you find it. So this added a whole other dreamlike quality to navigating Nicaragua's street cities and country. Sometimes the landmarks cease to exist. And you get something like Donde fue Calvario Church, where Calvario Church was. So you better hope someone knows where that church was if you're lost. But it's also, in a way, the past kind of cheating death, right? Because it helps you triangulate where you are now through the use of landmark phantasm. So you can imagine the complexity this introduced when trying to find my mother's childhood farm, her grade school, the homes of our family like we did during this trip. And it truly felt like a dream, one that you could miss by half a block and going the wrong direction, or one that through happy accidents and the kindness of strangers lets you revisit your life in the past. My mom rode in the passenger seat, and some other family members and I rode on my cousin's truck bed. Which stop was in Balsam. My mother's coffee farm, my grandmother's coffee farm in the north, where my mother grew up. After some time circling the countryside, we found someone that pointed us in the right direction, only to know that now there were 3 Balsamos. That included Balsamo del Norte, so Balsamo of the north, and Balsamo del Sur, Balsamo of the south. And so they just loved the name. My grandmother made up that name, and they just loved it so much that it was 3. And so another hour on the road, visiting Balsamos Norte and Sur, we finally found in the middle of the mountain this other Balsamo, and it was it. So when we pulled up, my mother greeted the new family that owns the farm, and we explained that she grew up there. The new family let us walk around the grounds. We walked it mostly silent, letting the earth beneath us and the creek that runs through the farm do the talking, feeling my grandmother and the history of our family wash over us, punctuated by tears and a tropical rain. And I understood my mother more now. She didn't have a lot of pictures when she was young, but we were standing in a snapshot of her formative years. We jumped back in the truck and we made our way home. And you know, no matter the size of a country, somehow a truck that makes it feel larger. You know, maybe it's the way you feel every bump on the road, or the fact that you can lay down and just look at the sky. The next day, we visited her grade school in Makeda, a journey made easier by more prominent landmarks. When we arrived, we heard from the schoolmaster that many of the class pictures were still there, including my mother's. So as we walked through the grounds, we made our way through class after class and wall after wall, finally reached her class. And we looked hard, and we noticed that my mother is the only person missing in the class picture. Someone had taken the photo, and I could feel her disappointment. She couldn't fully revisit this moment in her life. So we sat outside, staring at, for some reason, a dilapidated plane on the hill that the jungle was taking over again. And I looked over at her and said, someone loved you so much here that they needed to keep your picture. And I rested my head on her shoulder and we allowed the silence to fill us. And I realized my mother didn't just leave. People were also. And the magnitude of that choice reverberated through all our times. Someone needed to hold on to the Gloria they used to know. We were equally as haunted by her absence as she was. Mm-hmm. Nicaraguan poet, writer, father of modernismo, Rubén Darío, once said, "Si la patria la sueña," which means if your mother is small, one must dream it. It never really was about the size of a country, but the size of your heart. Even Rubén Darío had to leave Nicaragua, a writer and diplomat. Maybe longing for patria is a state of existence that is native to the Nicaraguan heart, to the Latin American heart. Since my mother passed from stage 4 breast cancer, all I can do is revisit these moments, navigating my marks, finding my way through the kindness of a stranger, pointing me in the right direction. I sometimes go back to that moment at the farm, at her school, in the theater, next to my mother, watching a film that reminded her of my grandmother, that now reminds me of her. A siren song about the fleeting nature of time and life. Volver, con la frente marchita. Las nieves del tiempo pelatearon mi sien. Sentir que es un soplo de vida, que 20 años pasaron, que febril la mirada, errante en las sombras te busca y te nombra. Vivir, con el alma aferrada, un dulce recuerdo que lloro otra vez. Don't worry, I'm going to translate for you. To return with a withered face, oh, of time having whitened my temples, to feel that life is but a puff in the wind, that 20 years is nothing, that the feverish look, wandering in the shadow, looks for you and names you. To live with the soul clutched to a sweet memory that I weep for once again. I'll always carry Volver with me, but most importantly, what it means to return.
Beautiful, Edwin. Thank you. And thanks for sharing your mom with us. Where is it?
Oh, so this is actually us standing in the Rio Coco. So that's like one of the main rivers in Nicaragua. And so it just was this moment where she was able to like step in the river again after so long. Like I think she hadn't been in it since she was like 17 or 18.
She looks beautiful. She looks young.
Yeah, it was a really good trip, even though it had those moments, you know?
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Ed, welcome back to your house.
Thank you. Good to be back. I wasn't there, but I heard that when my grandma first met my dad, she wasn't a fan. It wasn't personal. Mostly she just didn't like that he was Canadian. My grandmother was a real Midwesterner, born in Iowa, lived in Chicago, bowled every weekend. She would not eat vegetables or leafy greens. I never once saw her drink water. Not once. Grandma didn't like Canada for a handful of reasons. One, simple, wasn't in the United States of America. Two, this was a big one. Seatbelts were required by law in Canada. This was the early 80s, mind you, and Ralph Nader hadn't come for our freedom yet. Three, last but certainly not least, she did not like the money. She called it funny money. She felt that money should be green, and green only. For the record, Canadian money is similar to American money. There's a person on one side, a building, or a 16 on the other, 5, 10, 20, 100. Usually 70 to 75 cents to the US dollar. To her, it was foreign, bizarre, and virtually worthless. How much is that in real money? She asked. Most of the Americans I was exposed to as a young child were born on the south side of Chicago and stayed on the south side of Chicago. They drank Miller, ate pizza with sausage on it, called it a roof, and not a roof. They were from Chicago. When my family moved from Toronto to the suburbs of Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas in 1998, I was exposed to a much larger cross-section of the American populace. My parents weren't the only ones moving to Texas. A lot of people from all over were attracted by great public schools and low taxes. There were families from California, the East Coast, and the North Side of Chicago who had heard lots of terrible things that turned out to be okay. There were even still a handful of bona fide Texans there. The Dallas suburbs never felt like home, and all the time I lived there, all I could think about was how excited I was to go someplace else. But I always had friends. I was one of many transplants feeling out of place, just passing through. Despite coming from different places, we spoke a common language. Every summer, my family would pile in the car and drive back to Canada for a month or two. We always took the same route up, 1,000 miles, across the length of Oklahoma, through Missouri and southern Illinois to Chicago. After a week with my family, we would finish the last 500 miles through Michigan and into Canada, across Michigan, into Canada, and back to Toronto.
The way back, we would mix it up. My dad traveled a lot for his work, so we would try to coordinate the trip with his meetings, stay in different cities. We did college visits with my older brother. We took scenic routes and explored all over upstate New York, Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. We stayed in the Ozarks at a resort that looked a lot nicer in the pictures. There was a big family reunion there. We were kept up all night with the sounds of fighting, fucking, and gunshots. True story. We went to Beale Street and Graceland in Memphis. We went to all around Nashville before it was cool. As time went on, we made fewer stops. My older brother started college, wasn't really interested in the road trip anymore. My dad throwed his back, really struggled sitting in the car, which just left my mom and we stuck to the highway, stopping only for gas, and got the trip down in 2 days both ways, driving 800,000-mile stretches. We just wanted to reach our destination because there was less to see, fewer reasons to stop. Things had changed. When the Walmarts and Applebee's moved into small towns, they snuffed out anything that made it distinct. Last year, I went back to Dallas for work. 10 days downtown, opening an immersive Disney museum. I was there to train the staff, kids mostly working their first or second real job, teaching them to talk to guests, same way they talk to each other. Openness, earnestness, passion for art. The people I met there in the city center were diverse, generous, accepting. To my genuine surprise, I found myself thinking, I could live here. Dallas isn't so different from Los Angeles. We hear how our country is more divided than it's ever been, and that's partly true. But I think the real issue is people don't get out much, how much alike we really are. Culturally, America is more homogenous than it's ever been. We're no longer from countless different towns. We all come from one of three places: the city, the suburbs, or the country. The West Coast, Midwest, the South. The geography is different. Most of the rest is exactly the same. In rural America, most small towns have the same stores, same places to eat, and the same lack of opportunity that drives young people. On one of our last family trips, we stopped in Watkins Glen, New York for lunch. But what we didn't know before we stopped was there was a NASCAR race. It was absolutely packed. The atmosphere was electric, a little bit messy. But what really stood out to us was that these people from New York State, and Western Pennsylvania mostly, all spoke with a Southern twang. When I was a kid, I don't know that they'll get to meet a true regional archetype, a real Midwesterner like my grandma. To her, to a lot of people, 500 miles away was foreign. Might as well have been on the other side of the planet. I think they'll always exist, but they seem to be a dying breed. Maybe we're losing something. But maybe when we realize how small the country is getting, how close we all are, we'll learn to work together. Thank you.
Kevin,
Thank you.
welcome back.
Thanks.
Wow, so Canada to Dallas.
Bit of a change.
That's a bit of a leap. Hey, Makeda, you guys, this is the first time you've heard the story. Oh, no. This is going to be awesome. I'm so excited. This is going to be awesome. Makeda Declet, everybody.
Okay, so tonight I'd like to share the story of trying to fit in as a teenager, something I think many can relate to, and how that quest was almost thwarted when I tried to find God. So when I was 13 years old, my mom moved us from Brooklyn, New York to Atlanta, Georgia. And whenever I tell this to people, they look at me with a sense of pity on their face, like I had won the lottery, being raised in one of the greatest cities in the world, and then lost the ticket. That must have been hard, they say. But what they don't know is by the time that I was in the 7th grade, I was already developing a global perspective. Sure, New York City is incredibly eclectic and diverse, but you also have to understand that the early aughts were the peak of angsty teen television shows, and I was their #1 viewer. So my worldview wasn't limited to East New York. I knew as much about suburban life as I knew about riding the ACE in Atlanta. My pre-teen brain sounded a lot like Cape Cod. Spoiler alert, it was not Cape Cod. So the witty banter I picked up from Austin and Dawson's Creek, or the quick puns I learned from Buffy and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, did little to prepare me for the slow drawl of a Southern middle schooler. You're always shiny when you're the new kid. I would say water. Water? My accent was never very strong. I only had one pair of Jordans, which disappointed them greatly. And I sucked at doing a Harlem Shake. So it wasn't long before the new kid shine wore off and I was left to my own devices. Nevertheless, I thrived. After moving from one middle school to the next, and not one, not two, but 3 high schools, I found myself at Dutchtown High in Stockbridge, Georgia. Not exactly New England, but there was a golf course. Or so I heard. And my school, Dutchtown, was a brand new school where I'd be a part of the first graduating class. An opportunity for a lot of firsts. It suited my sensibilities. So I tried out for the varsity tennis team. When I didn't make that, I was considered for the junior varsity tennis team. And when I didn't make that cut, well, hello, I am a Declet, and I was on Dutchtown's inaugural intramural tennis team. We never played a game, but the uniforms were cute, and it was great on my college application. I was class president for 2 years, which we told is just like a nerd version of the high school jock who peaks too soon, but that is a story for another day. The point is that I was finding my way. Sleepovers and friend dates, and hell yeah, look at you adapting to situations, you goddamn star. But Georgia is a funny place, a different place than New York City. Sweet tea and TV jigs, Christian country rock in the mornings, Bible study and mission trips that my friends would go on that I had no context for. I traded the windows of the empty plane for that of a yellow school bus, and it would pass several churches, each with its own billboard and marquee. Okay, and in my memory, the gist of it was always an image of a group of young, mostly white churchgoers, and a huge green pasture under a bright yellow sun with messages like, join us, and ready to have a relationship with us and God. I was doing fine in school, but it was bigger. I needed to be fine in the whole state. When in Rome, do as Romans do. And when in Georgia, drink sweet tea and pray. It's an exaggeration. Teenage brain, it made absolute sense. The only thing standing between me and full assimilation was our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So my family wasn't very religious. We said our prayers every night. The oft recited, now I lay me down to sleep. Said it like a superstition or a promise for someone. We never graduated to the Lord's Prayer. And a couple days after 9/11, my mom swore that the clouds formed a stairway to heaven. We had a general, I wouldn't even say understanding, but more like a belief that there was something beyond ourselves, but we just operated on vibes, not the church. So if I was going to have a religion, I was going to have to appropriate it. I had a best friend, when she was friend at the time, Sarah Belcher. And her family were super committed Christians, like super approachable. Church every Sunday, Bible study, mission trips. So I thought, perfect, this is my way in. What I hadn't considered at the time is that a group of white people teaching a person of color religion is exactly how the book stole Plymouth Rock. Hashtag colonization. But that is an adult book. My smooth teenage brain had my eye on the book. But no one wants to hear that the only reason you're interested in their religion is because you're collecting experiences like infinity stones. And I wasn't raised to ask for anything, so I had to be strategic. So I started dropping these not very subtle hints. I'd be eating at Sarah's house and really hamming it up. This is so good. Won't he do it? And when things didn't go my way, it was his time every time. They picked up on what I was doing and they invited me to Sunday service. Ooh, but it wasn't a normal service. It was a special friend and family day where the congregants of the church invited their hidden friends for a day of worship. And the congregation was mostly white, so I felt very out of place. And then a bus pulled up and offloaded a bunch of other people, which made me uncomfortable because where did they come from? Did they just bust everyone in for a photo op, a billboard with the young, diverse, mostly white people, green pasture under the yellow sun? Like, what is going on? Bus people file past. And I'm standing there with the Belchers, who are regulars, and I'm waving, welcoming these people in. I'm not an infiltrator. Welcome to church. Welcome to church. And this church wasn't just any regular church, in the sense that it was a barn. Tall, wide barn doors lay on the floor. And for this special day, they pulled out rows and rows of picnic chairs, like kind with the seat at the bottom and the back support, and then in the middle there's like the gap. And they pull out a projector and a screen, and they start playing Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. Very controversial at the time. But I'm watching it. Okay, I'm concentrated. It's bloody. It's gory. Satan has a baby. And I look down, and there's a kid in front of me. Georgia boy, like well-fed kind of dude. Homegrown. And between the back support and the seat of his chair, in the gap, is 6 inches of his butt crack. I'm 14, 15 maybe at this point, so butt cracks are still hilarious. Okay, here's a saying I learned later in life. The devil works hard, but God works harder. Well, we were all about to be tested. I pull my eyes back up to the screen. I'm gonna make it, we're almost there. And then I hear, and I look over, and Sarah has found the cat. All hell breaks loose. We start dying of laughter. We can't stop. We're shaking. We're trying to keep it together. I'm about to keep my pants. The room is absolutely spinning. And then Mrs. Belcher leans over and says, "What are y'all doing?" Sarah and I, without looking at one another, burst into tears. And these are not the tears of teenage girls being scolded. These are the tears of a plan coming together. And with zero communication between us, we just start explaining how much we're moved by the movie and the Jesus and the crucifixion and all that stuff. And I think she bought it. Actually, this is how the Salem Witch Trial started, like just a couple of teen girls lying away a giggle. Anyway, the movie ended, thank God. We left the church barn and went outside to what was a pretty green pasture and handed out lunches and brown paper bags. Welcome to church. Welcome to church. That was the end of the road for me, as far as I could get in this niche community. A little ass crack, very little assimilation. And I didn't forge a relationship with God that day, but I certainly solidified my bond with Sarah Belcher. We became best friends and navigated the trenches of teenage awkwardness together for years after. I've now lived in 4 major U.S. cities in my life: New York, Atlanta, LA, and most recently Chicago. And while I have religiously loved for God, I've certainly found beauty. I've certainly found friends and love and uncontrollable laughter. Sarah Belcher visited me in New York when I moved back to undergrad, and once in LA with a boyfriend she later moved to Australia with. I haven't seen her in a while, though I'm sure we'll cross paths again in this lifetime. But if we don't, and there is an afterlife or whatever comes next, I'm confident we'll catch up there, where, if all goes to plan, we will both be very, very popular. Thank you.
Thank you, Makeda. Gordon,
Hello.
you want to share?
Ready to share?
I'm very excited. Gordon,
I've been up to my ass, and all I have to show for it is this black book. I don't have feelings or much else in the way of human attributes. Nonetheless, I am compelled to leave a record. So let the record show that I brandished a black book. I spent a lot of time going back and forth between LA and the Bay Area, visiting my mom, who is facing end-of-life issues. I'm there to provide comfort to my mom, sometimes with mixed results. Whatever I can't express in person can be found in my black book. I often work on it at night when all my other work is done. It's like a place I go to ponder. It's the black book of how I learned to accept mortality, or at least pretend to. Let's look at the first page. It's bats. No matter what you think of them, or whatever they might symbolize to me, bats are beautiful. Whenever I see a bat fluttering arbitrarily in the darkness, I am warmed inside. My mother and I share this love for bats. She is a member of the North American Society for Bat Research. They have actually had their annual meetings every year in October. With my mom now in the twilight, bats bring comfort. There are things to ponder about this drawing, but we're going to have to ponder them privately. Butterfly hunters. What kind of person hunts butterflies? I mean, besides scientists, freaks, dreamers, and intellectuals. When I think of this drawing, I think of my father. Not that he was interested in butterflies, he was not. He preferred birds and trees, but he would have understood the forces that compel someone to chase butterflies. Ghosts at the table. Free spirits, drinking spirits. In the film The 400 Blows, there is a scene with Antoine, a misunderstood youth, sitting at a table with his parents. It's a poignant scene. But really, this is my happy place. It's a waterfall. My cousins, sibling, and I inherited shares of a property in the Cascade Mountains in Oregon, thanks to my grandfather, my mother's father. The forest and most of the buildings burned down in 2020. It still has the magic. Speaking of magic,
Oh, no. Oops.
we're not going to talk about
Hold on. Here we go.
Abira Ali. That's when we're speaking.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily remember all the circumstances of a drawing, but in this case, I do. Eliza had gone off to college. Abira and I had tea in the garden of the house, and the conversation was about psilocybin therapy. Eliza later added some fine details to the dress. Catchers of the Falling Moon. This drawing makes a nice bridge between psilocybin therapy and Wiener Schnitzel mysticism. For a time, I wanted to do a Wiener Schnitzel mysticism calendar, but although the idea has some meat to it, I ultimately lost interest. It's one of those ideas that you don't get around to fully realizing, and then you discover that someone else has had the same idea at its moment. That's bad. What to expect in the afterlife? This was for an album cover. one of the ideas that was rejected. So this drawing never met its audience. Let's look at the next. Okay, yes, there's another. This is the cleanliness robot. This is another seemingly harebrained idea that has become commonplace before it even occurred to me. Most of these drawings, it would be fair to wonder if they have an audience at all. And I would have to admit that I don't know. I do know that my mom is probably not the target audience. She has little to no interest in quasi-mysticism or harebrained schemes that even I have no intention of pursuing. Over the last year and a half, she's been living in a care home called the Wonder Years. I stay in her now empty apartment in Berkeley when I visit. Like I said, I've been concerned with her comfort and happiness. And perhaps one reason I sometimes fail miserably at this is because my own life has been so dedicated to my own fulfillment. Mom has the dessert. Since she's no longer living independently, she's been eating things that can't be easily identified and wearing unusual colors. She doesn't hear well and is also quite reserved. Conversation can be a challenge. I've spent some visits wondering what to say, not making much connection. There's an enormous TV and I'm powerless with TV. I get consumed by it, as if by a whirlpool, particularly if the program is of a puerile nature. If there's a low-budget, unsolved murder show on with scenes of overgrown vacant lots and a wood-paneled rec room, a documentary on butterfly hunters, or an infomercial on robots that clean your house when you're not there, I'm fully attentive and watching. I've gotten pretty good at turning the TV off, and I also developed other strategies like bringing candy, or my friend Rafeal, who's like candy. Worst fears realized. This is not the presentation that I intended. But anyway, just ignore those two guys. Because I want to talk about Rafeal at this time. Rafeal is my old friend who became my brother without parental involvement. My mom has always liked him. When I first brought him around, she wondered aloud why I couldn't be more like Brody. What is so clear to me that he's a monster. My mom has a wonderful walk-in closet in her apartment. I spend a lot of time in here when I visit. I made it into my vocal recording booth for work. The shelves are full of boxes of old photos, many of grim-faced ancestors. I took one of the boxes with me when I went out to see my mom. On my way there, I was stopped at a light in Richmond, California, which is the very anus of the Bay Area, if not the whole state of California. It's not the nation's anus, however. It's a big country, so for that, I need to go somewhere like Ohio, my place of birth. But I digress. I'm on my way to visit my mom, and just as the light changed, something hit my car with considerable force. It was smeared across part of the back window. It looked like an egg. It was an egg. When I later mentioned this to Brody, he said that it was the chickens coming home to roost. I took the box and showed it to the photos to my mother. She was interested and knew who a lot of the ancestors were. Yes, they're not my ancestors, but they're my brothers, and they're there with their trains. This is before I joined the party. The chair on the right has been in the family longer than I have. I have it now. It was in my mom's apartment, and on a recent visit, my mom said, "Take the chair home." I did. I also have the trains in a box in my basement. I still have one of the brothers. I see him occasionally. He lives on the account. Here he is in 1960. I showed this picture to my mom. I said, "Look how happy he is." And she said something along the lines of, "I don't know why he's so happy. That car had holes in the floor." Here he is, a dozen or so years later, and he's still happy. By then, he had his own car, and I can assure you, it had holes in it. There's my mom. I never knew this picture existed, or even that my mom had once been a teenager, but she and said she'd been looking for it. She thought it was lost for good, but I was very happy to find it because it made her happy that day. But that's my dad, who looks very, very young, but we think he's probably a late teenager at that time. He's at some university or other. He must have been in his late teens, but it still, to me, looks like a child. Here I am, with the other assholes. I'm the cute-looking one at the bottom. I couldn't have looked like that for very long, but the others have never seen me in any other way. Last week, on my most recent trip, Ira was helping organize my mom's apartment and found a folder containing every official document or correspondence ever written about me, from birth on up through college. It's all there. Report cards, vaccine records, and despairing letters from every form of authority you can think of. It's my permanent record. Unlike when my mom saw a picture of herself as a teenager, I was not happy to see this. It's worse than I remembered. There was a time to explore it at length this time, but the main theme was that it appears that I never did anything I feel like. And this caused much hand-wringing everywhere I went, and resulted in me not staying so long in many places. I was kind of shaken when I read all this stuff. Mostly I felt bad for my mom, having to get so many bad reports about me. But I was also a little mystified as to why she kept so much negative correspondence about me. Some of which she herself had written. I think we don't have that part, but I can kind of remember what it says. But she's describing me as an aggressive child and one that you need to be very firm with. You know, and she's apparently I was 3. And she's applying for a school, for me to go to a school. And, you know, it was as if she'd never given birth to or tried to raise an alien baby before. So we got in the car and we went out, Ira and I, to see my mom. She had just moved to a new room and was asleep when we got there. I sat down and read to her from The New Yorker, a magazine that she loved so much. She opened her eyes at various times, but did not fully awaken. I kept reading. It got late, and we had to leave, so I could go back to work. We started to say our goodbyes. When, in this situation, every goodbye could be the last. But this time, it was different. I felt myself beginning to cry. Feelings. I had feelings. I was on the verge of expressing a real emotion. But I didn't want my mom to see that. She's tough. Never do something like that. But she did see it. She became very present. I held her hands, and I told her that we found a permanent record. I said, I was very sorry about having been such a terrible student and a problem child. And she laughed and said, oh, you were fine. So let's end at this point back in my black book and conclude with a leg up. Thank you.
Slides in. Nah, you were fine. That was fun. Kevin, Edwin, Makeda, Gordon, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yay.
Yeah. Enrique. And Christopher Riley, thank you. Thank you for being my guys and having my back. Thank you. So we will be here November 9th with our warrior unit. Our veterans are already working on their stories. So it will be a carry on. And it will be Veterans Day weekend. So please show up to support them. They're pretty awesome. I'll just tell you that. And we'll be back in December something, 8th? I think it's an 8th. It's December 8th. And the theme will be 'Tis the Season. Oh, that'll be awesome too. Okay, thank you. There's wine, there's cookies and stuff. Kevin brought all that. Okay, Makeda brought everything.
I didn't bring any of it for the record.
Brought all.
I didn't bring
It's all.
any.
Oh yeah, Joey.